All right. Well, good morning and good evening, everyone. It is Jennifer Britton, and we are at the 15th of January. It is time for our first call for 2018. For those of you that joined me in the fall as we were launching Effective Virtual Conversations, you might know that this is probably number 12 in a series that started late last July. For 2018, I'll be hosting these calls on a monthly basis, and really they're intended to help you get better with your conversations virtually. So perhaps you are leading virtual group coaching, or maybe a webinar, or even a Facebook Live call. Virtual events continue to expand. And as you probably know, every month we have different people joining me. We have people who are here, once or coming back. So if you can join me, our next call is going to be in February. So today's call is really getting you to start thinking about the skills you want to lead from with your own virtual conversations. And as we get going, I'd like you to think about the different types of virtual conversations you're having. In Effective Virtual Conversations, I go into some of the different types of conversations, from coaching to mentoring to performance management and leadership conversations. The virtual realm is really hosting such a wide variety of conversations. Now, that creates opportunity, but it also creates some interesting nuances for those of us stepping into this work. I always like to assert that whatever we can do in person is usually, with some creativity, something we can do in the virtual realm. So this morning I want to zoom into chapter 3 of Effective Virtual Conversations. I want to share with you actually the different skills that I highlight in this chapter, which includes 8 different skill sets. And whether you are new to this work or whether you're experienced, I'd actually invite you, as I move through them, to note for yourself, where are you? Which of these skills are strengths? And obviously, with strengths that we bring to the table, hopefully we're creating opportunities to leverage them. And in contrast, I'd also like you to think about what are the skills that maybe need a little bit more attention. Now, this is by no means comprehensive, but certainly I think these 8 skill areas will put you in the arena or the neighborhood of more masterful virtual conversations. Like anything, we need to practice it. So facilitation, coaching, training, just great conversation is a skill set. It's like a muscle. And if we're not using it, it's very easy to lose it. So as you step into the new year, think about what opportunities you have to keep these skills alive. I think what I notice, having worked in this virtual arena for many, many decades now, it's sort of an exciting time. A lot more teams and organizations are embracing virtual, not only on the old school death by conference call mindset, but also by looking at different ways. So maybe they're moving to Zoom like we meet on, or perhaps they're using WebEx or some other streaming platform. And the more visual anchors that we have, so for those of you that are watching this recording or ever joining me on a Zoom live call, we can see each other. And that is an enabler. That helps us to create some trust and safety, as well as connection early on. So through the next 30 minutes really, I'm going to be taking you through these 8 different skill areas. You'll notice some overlap. I really felt it was important in writing Effective Virtual Conversations to put these skills in different buckets. For many, many years now, through Virtual Train-to-Trainers, I've been working with experienced facilitators and new coaches. And really, I keep getting the question, what are these different skill areas? So I'm going to walk you through very quickly, very high level in the next 25 minutes, 8 different skill buckets. The first one being creating the context, and we'll start off with that in a minute. I've already made reference, though, to how do we create a safe and engaging conversation space. We need to have trust, safety, and connection. And I'll return back to this. But obviously, once we've got a great space to have the conversation in, we want to make sure that we're leveraging other skills, including, you can note these down for yourself. And of course, the slides, the whole presentation will be available over at effectivevirtualconversations.com. letstalkvirtual.com. If you head on over there, you'll find most of our community calls posted. Not all of them go there, but this one will be posted, certainly for the month of January and February 2018. And we really do want to hone these skills that we're using every day, like communication, like process skills. We hopefully are also cultivating some tools in our toolkit. I want to get into 5 or 6 of those that I think are useful for calls of all stripes. Other areas we want to learn more about, or perhaps really think about how we might have skills already in this area, things like group development, technical skills, design skills, and there is a whole bucket of skills that I term as ourselves as facilitators, because very much our presence, which is a term we use quite a lot these days, is really what cultivates the environment for our calls. So if you've joined me for past calls or have looked in at some of our videos, certainly you'll notice that there's always a different type of environment. Today is a holiday in the US, but not for the rest of us in the rest of the world. And I know the calls that I've led already this Monday morning have been quite engaging, and everyone has its own rhythm. So part of what we do, I want to take you into our first bucket, which is really called creating the context. In creating an environment, like think about what is that environment you want to create? What are the things that you're doing to connect people or to orient them? Sometimes, like today's call, people are dropping in for half an hour. Obviously, they want to know where we're going, what's the focus, where can I get more information? So a lot of times, if you're joining me for these calls, I'm not doing a marketing shtick. I'm just letting people know where is the information. And everything for this book is, of course, housed under Effective Virtual Conversations. Now, one thing that's a little bit different in the virtual realm, and this is where you may have differentiation in your calls. You may have some people dialing in, so they can't see anything. So process and knowing where you're going is even more important than those of us that might be able to see the screen. So for most effective virtual conversation calls, like most of my virtual work these days, I'll usually have slides that help to orient and create an anchor point. And very much in this work, we want to let people know what they can expect and also where we're going. So obviously, setting expectations for a 30-minute call is very different than working with a group over multiple weeks, but you will want to let people know about things like confidentiality, what they can expect in terms of recording, and just a reminder that these calls are all recorded, so please only share to what you would like to share. We also want to be clear about the process we're engaging in. And so for today, I know we have a caller. It may not be easy to use chat. I'm not thinking that you have chat ability, but one of the things I usually like to do in our virtual calls is invite people to chat as we go. And that helps to create some engagement. So throughout today's call, I'm going to be inviting some pause points, some moments for you to just sit, reflect for just about 30 or 40 seconds before we move on to the next skill. So this first skill bucket that I've quickly touched on for the last 2 or 3 minutes is, of course, creating the context, trust, safety, connection, process, and expectations. Before we move on, I'm going to give you a 30-second pause just to jot down a couple of adjectives that describe the context you want to create in an upcoming conversation. Maybe it's fun, maybe it's serious. Take 20 or 30 seconds just to jot down what is the environment you want to create, and perhaps what are some things you want to keep in mind based on the trust, safety, connection that we've just talked about. I'm going to sit here for about 20 seconds and then we'll move on to our next skill area. For those of you that have been with me in earlier calls, you might be familiar that I talk about something I've named the TRIAD of virtual learning: trust, safety, and connection. And these elements are so important. In fact, that's why I've put creating a context as one of our first skill sets. Without safety, without feeling connected, without trust, it may be more of a monologue, similar to what I'm doing today where I'm teaching, but that's not the environment we want to create when we are actually engaging people in conversation. So think about how you, as a facilitator, can create trust, safety, and connection. One of the trends, and I made reference to this last month as we were looking at the 14th annual year-end group programs call, one of the things I really love using and try to do it very quickly in group virtual calls these days is either move people into breakouts or get people using annotation. And most virtual platforms will allow you one or both. So something to note down and maybe do some more exploration of if you're not familiar with them already, breakouts and also annotation. Just a couple of ways for you to really get people engaged in the conversation right away. And that helps bring people into the conversation. So our next and our second bucket of skills today is communication. I'm going to move through these really quickly, but literally we could probably spend a couple of these monthly calls dedicated to communication. Masterful virtual facilitators are great listeners. We're not listening only to what people are saying, but we're listening to what's behind what's being said. There really is on virtual calls, especially when you have multiple people on the line, a whole energy that gets created. And that macro level of listening, which is often termed global listening, level 3 listening by many writers, such as Whitworth, Sandal, we really want to be honing into that levels of listening where it's not just about seeing, it's also about hearing. And within that communication frame, we're really reading the environment, noticing what's happening. When people are speaking, what's their pace? What's the pitch? How fast are they speaking? Those are really critical sort of energy points in terms of looking at where the whole tone is of the environment. And of course, as we're listening, we're not necessarily listening to figure out what's my next question. We're listening to absorb, to really take in what we're hearing, what we're noticing in individuals and across the group or the team that we're working with. One of the most important skills we have in this bucket of communication is, of course, questioning. And I've moved that up the list. If you see it on the screen, you'll notice I've sort of connected listening and questioning. And I do that because very much we want to take what we're hearing and what we're noticing to infuse the questions we're asking. Now, learning styles has gotten a bit of a question mark by many educators in recent years, but I would assert, even in the virtual work that I do, I see learning styles show up day in and day out. And very early on in groups that I work with on long term, I want to get aware or become more aware of what are the learning styles in the room. Who are the kinesthetic who are the kinesthetic workers, learners that love the worksheets, that actually love to do things, stand up rather than sit down on our calls. And, you know, a question like, what would you do, is very different than what would you think. If I'm working with more cerebral, perhaps professionals, technical individuals, I might be using a line of questioning, which is less about doing and more about thinking. If I'm working with technical experts, I spent many years in the safety industry. They weren't really about thinking, they were all about seeing, because their work was about making sure things were done right. Their work was about analysis and looking, investigation. So we do want to make sure that we're adjusting our language for the context in which we are coaching or having our virtual conversations, and that helps to create clarity. So as we move forward, again, we're just touching down on these areas today. I'd like you to think about which skills in the communication bucket might benefit from a bit more attention this year. Maybe as a virtual facilitator, you want to be a better listener or ask more powerful questions or become more aware of what's happening in the environment. As I move to the next slide, just take 20 seconds or so to note for yourself what's one area you want to be focusing more on this year. And the third bucket for today is all about design. Now, a few months ago, I did a whole 30-minute call on design in the virtual domain. Again, this is a much more extended conversation, but in effective virtual conversations, I felt that it was really important to get us thinking about different design elements. So if you have a few minutes, you'll want to check out the call on design. I introduce a framework I call PEBBLES, etc. And PEBBLES, etc. represents almost about a dozen different things we want to do in design. It involves engagement at different touch points. It involves getting people more active. It involves allowing people time and space, just as I've been doing so far in our call, to make the link and loop it back to their everyday work. In a death by conference call arena, very easy to be multitasking. And in fact, this is one of the reasons why I now host most of my programs on Zoom, where people are encouraged to come with their streaming. It's much harder to get disengaged, although it is possible. It's much harder to be multitasking when you're on a streaming call. And when you are facilitating conversations that matter virtually, it's really important that we have everyone at the table really present and attuned in to the others on the call. A few weeks ago, I talked again in the year-end call on use of graphics and visuals. I think that's an area that certainly today's call is not a great example of it, but in most calls, you want to think about how do you use graphics and visuals to capture attention. And that can really be supplemented by more hands-on activities. You'll notice that depending on our mixture of people joining me for these calls, sometimes I've been using annotation. And annotation, of course, is a function where you can get people to draw things on the screen. And it's a different way to engage folk. I've had a lot of kinesthetic learners say they enjoy using the drawing tool because it gets them active. It brings their voice into the room without having to use their voice. It allows them to use their hands. So for design, I'd like you to just note, is it design work, engagement, learning, activities, or visuals that you think is more important? And if you can see the screen, i.e. if you're listening into this, you'll notice that I've already grabbed the pen and I'm just marking up the screen to help us create some visual interest. Because part of engagement is about keeping the pace moving. And you'll note within your own work what fast means, what too fast means, and what slowness means. So I'm going to clear this off. As I'm clearing off the drawings, I'd like you to note for yourself, what do you further want to investigate on design? Or perhaps if you're already versed in this area, what is one thing you'd like to change up a little bit in terms of your design during 2018? Take a few seconds right now just to jot that down for yourself. And then we're going to move to bucket number, actually we're going to move to PEBBLES. I did put up a slide on PEBBLES. So one of the things that I've really wanted to be doing more this year, and it links into PEBBLES, is just to create more visual reminders. In years gone by, we've really thought about how many slides do we have for a certain amount of time? And I think certainly bringing material back visually, even if it's a conversation, helps to create those shared mental models that Peter Senge talked so much about in the late 1990s as we were looking at moving to a systems approach of learning. So I brought back the slide on PEBBLES just to really reacquaint anyone who has been with me on former calls. This comes from the design chapter of Effective Virtual Conversations. And in addition to the technical things that we want to do, I wanted to bring out some of the nuances of virtual learning. Things like making sure that we're preparing and practicing, that we are clear with our expectations, that we're using breakouts and thinking about how the brain can best learn. We also want to make sure that less is more. And so in today's call, although I could have been even more versed in, more than 8 areas. I think 8 areas is more than enough to cover in a 30-minute call. We always want to expect the unexpected because that usually will show up more, I think, in a virtual domain than not. And we want to create those opportunities to help people loop back and link it to their own workplace. That allows us to do the S in PEBBLES, set people up for success. Now, I didn't leave it at PEBBLES. I continued on to say PEBBLES, etc., because I've included an E, which stands for embrace the chaos. And I think, there's sometimes a mindset shift as we move into the virtual space. You're never quite sure how many people will be on a call. Is it 1? Is it 40? Is it, one person on phone? Is it one person on technical? What are the issues that are going to show up? So we just need to become very comfortable and flexible to be able to know our content, but also be able to move with it. And it's not only ourselves as a facilitator who may be feeling it, but it may also be the group members or team members that we're working with. So it is important to create clarity. That's the C in etc. And the T in etc. is about providing tools and resources. I've done a lot of calls, and actually our March call of 2018 will bring us back to tools and resources you may want to use. For those that have effective virtual conversations, check out chapter 7. I go into 24 different tools that you may use, and that's a nice segue into the next bucket of skills, which are tools. And just like any facilitator would have in his or her toolbox, we want to build that robust facilitation toolkit. Goal setting. How do we work with groups, teams, individuals on goals? I've got a number of blog posts this month on the topic of goal setting. If you are familiar with our main parent site, Potentials Realized, which is my company, I've been doing a whole series over at the Teams 365 blog on goal setting. Invite you to check that out. You can also head on over to groupcoaching.blogspot.com. Last week I talked about 5 ways to work with goals. Certainly virtually, we want to make sure we're leaving these pause points as I've done today. You may be working with a one-page plan, or you may be using other goal frameworks to get things going. We also want to have tools. There's 6 tools here if you can't see them on your screen, but another area of tools that are important is, of course, around decision making. How do we help a group, especially a group that may be geographically dispersed, can't see each other or doesn't know each other well? How do we help groups make decisions and prioritize? And that really can take us into the realm of facilitation tools, things like the urgent, important matrix, things like using dots for prioritization. Part of our role is to make sure that we really allow people to have their voices heard, co-create together, and come up with the priorities that are going to work best for the groups or teams that they're part of. And that may involve some facilitation and some coaching. Now, some groups, the 5th skill I list on tools, and just to read them out, we have goal setting, decision making, prioritization, coaching, and number 5 is consensus generation, and number 6 is problem solving. Consensus generation is something that I think I see a lot of virtual teams and remote teams struggle with. They may not know each other as well because they don't have time at the water cooler. So in helping teams create consensus, this may be an area that has multiple conversation touch points. First, you might want to get the team to define, what does consensus mean? Is it majority? Is it 100% agreement? What may I be able to flex to, or what's ultimately important for the entire team? I think this is an area I would say out of almost every team engagement in the last 18 months, probably 75% of the teams that I've worked with have flagged decision-making, prioritization, consensus generation, and one that's not on here, but difficult conversations as some of the top challenges for themselves as teams at the moment. So I brought in consensus generation as a tool. I think virtual facilitators should really be thinking more about looking at, how do I help this group or team create common ground? Or sometimes it's not about creating one common ground, it's about learning how to work across differences so that they can all be pulling in the same way. So tools, again, we're coming towards the end of our call, but think about the different tools that you would like to add this year. And that may go hand in hand with technical, because technical is the next bucket of skills. It includes things like creating platforms or using platforms that you understand and work with. Technical skills, I think, are one area that a lot of newer and more experienced facilitators in this realm find a challenge. Platforms can change. They can, I certainly look at, even the last few years, how I've moved from phone only over to more Skype calls. replacing Skype with WebEx. Join me now. In the last 2-3 years, Zoom has pretty much been my platform, but there's some nuances here that we want to learn about. And that may include things like, how do I activate breakouts, which is bullet number 3, and how do I start and end a recording? How do I take that recording and make it available to everyone? And some other technical skill development may be in the areas of slide development. There's a whole science behind slide design that I'd point you to wonderful people like Duarte. I would also point you to, I'm blanking out on his name. I'll include a link to some slide design, because it's a whole science and art form in and of itself. And I've remembered now the slide author. I wanted to reference the Zen of PowerPoint, but I don't think it's called the Zen of PowerPoint. I will put that in our notes today. Technically, you know, if things are clunky, if things aren't working well, people will disengage. So we really want to look at what's accessible for people, what will enable the conversation. And that may involve, you know, getting people to do some pre and post work. So I've included as a technical skill LMS management. LMS, of course, standing for Learning Management System. Are you doing everything low touch or high touch? So low touch for me are things like things that go to the cloud. Many of my on-demand programs are housed in Teachable. I've had courses on Udemy as well in the past, but there's a whole learning process that goes into understanding how that platform operates and how you can actually cultivate dialogue. Do you have people commenting there? Do you set up a secret Facebook group to have comments happening over there? We do want to think through some of these technical areas, which again can be a huge learning curve. And that can go hand in hand depending on, you know, what's brought you to the realm of virtual conversations. You might be great at the technical piece because that's been your world, or perhaps you're great at the next set of skills, which is group development. And of course, I've done many calls on this topic, but I'd like you to think about what's your knowledge of how groups form. How comfortable are you? And we've got skills coming up here again, building trust, creating connection, creating consensus, working through conflict. We can have a great call technically, but we want to make sure that we're meeting the group where they're at, helping the group move through whatever conversations they need to have. So really, it's not just about building the trust and connection. It's also about helping teams of groups move through conflict. Our second last skill area that I want to look at today, because we're almost at the end of our call, is ourselves as facilitators. And again, for those that come from the coaching realm, I think, you know, many of our coaching competencies speak to how are we showing up as a coach. Competency number 4 in the International Coach Federation framework is all about presence. That's ourselves as facilitators, how we're showing up. And I think in the virtual realm, our energy brings a tremendous influence on the call. If we're speaking in deadpan, people are going to disconnect. If we're going too fast and you're working with a multilingual audience, they'll also disconnect. So think about how your presence is being translated virtually and also by voice. And that can really influence how engaged people are, as I've said. Now, part of the comfort in this, because I've said this before, I probably don't want to be quoted on it, but it's true. Like, groups are like dogs. They smell fear. And when you're working with entities, whether it's face-to-face or even virtually, people will pick up so much from your tone of voice, the way you're speaking. And we need to be comfortable in things like not really knowing who's on the line, or not knowing if technology is going to work. That means that we may need to self-manage some doubt, some concern that we have about how technology is going to work. And it also leads to needing to know ourselves and our self-awareness, what we're good at and where we may need some support. And that leads to another topic, which I haven't got scheduled yet for 2018, but I will, which is co-facilitation. In a small call like this, which I do monthly and it's a drop-in, very easy for me to host it myself. But if I'm doing a call, maybe full day with people from across the world in an organization, I will usually work with a producer. I will work with a technical expert who can make sure we've got everyone on the line, and when people drop off, that's okay, that they can, the producer can look after that. So we do need to know where our abilities start and end, and also what is useful to continue honing. Because this work, hopefully, at least for myself, and I say this from my own perspective, I'm constantly learning and honing my own work. One area I think that's key, and it's an interesting area, we may get into it in 2018, is intuition. You can't see everything that's going on, so you can only sort of guess what may be happening. And I think also there is an art form in the final bullet I have in this umbrella of ourselves as facilitators, which is the skill of keeping it simple and managing complexity. I've talked a lot in the last year and a half as Effective Virtual Conversations has come out through the writing stage and the publication stage about how do we help teams and groups operate in today's VUCA world. Volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And that's at all levels: geopolitical, economic, organizational. And so when people come to our calls, they may be calling in from different parts of the world. Those different parts of the world may be going through different challenges than we have. So the ability to keep it simple, manage complexity, at least in the framework of time that we have, really helps to create a more engaging conversation. And that leads us to our final bucket that I just want to quickly touch on today. Again, my hope is that today's call is a way to sort of whet your appetite, give you at least a start of your touch point on where are you with these skills, and maybe identify where you want to go. The 8th bucket is about process skills. How do we work with groups in, number 1, creating the focus? Number 2, how do we help groups define success? Another process skill, I think, is number 3, our ability to select tools that match the needs of the group. So today I've talked about things like consensus generation, working through conflict, setting goals, prioritizing. These are all, they link back to a set of facilitation tools that we can learn, we can practice, and we can iterate dependent on the context we're working in. And that does lead to, having great tools leads to engagement and interactivity. Today hasn't been one of those calls where we've used breakouts or we've used other things. I've really had you note for yourself, where are you on your skill base? And my hope, again, is that you will continue to develop skills this month and this year. I've included a few reflection questions here at the end of our call. What are the skill areas you bring strengths in? A second question for you to consider going forward is, what are the areas you could further develop? And finally, what are the specific actions that would help you develop skills in this or these areas? As always, I want to give you a nanosecond to pause. I'm going to make it 30 seconds, and I'll sit here in silence before I just take us into our roadmap of where we're going. Please, if it's useful, just take a few minutes, a few seconds to just reflect, or even take some notes in terms of your own development. What's going to help you in 2018 as you go forward with your skills? And I'll be right back on the line in 30 seconds. So a couple of support tools that I'm going to be offering this year. We're moving into our 3rd year of the Learning Lab and Design Studio. That's a Friday group that meets twice a month. And we cover calls related to virtual facilitation, group, and teamwork. It really is, every month has a different theme. And themes that are upcoming are things like micro-learning. We're going to return back to exercises for team development. Next month in February, I'm going to be going into more on video-based learning. And I think what I love about the Learning Lab and Design Studio is people either join us for the year or they join us for 3 or 4 months. And that allows for just a great community to be shaped. Every month I do 2 calls. One is a lecture call similar to this, and where I just provide you with more information and resources. And then a second call gets us to roll up our sleeves, and we actually get to play and practice with some of the different tools that are available. And so that is exciting. Our next call is actually later this week. And I did want to flag that there's a New Year special on until the 18th of the month, and that gives you a 50% discount on the annual rate. I'll include that again in our actual links to this video, which I hope to upload later today. One of the themes I was talking about last year was make it just 3 bullet points. So if you have a minute before you go back to your desk or move on to something else, I'd like to invite you to just note out your 3 bullet points from today's call. Today was call number 12 or 13 in the series. We're sort of taking the pace back a little bit. Our next call will be on February 26th at 11 a.m. And that's going to be back here in the same Zoom room. My topic for that day is going to be trust and teams and groups in the virtual space. Sort of foreshadowed it today, but I think trust is really still a critical issue for teams and groups in person as well as in the virtual space. And we'll talk more about that. And then also please highlight the third call. It's not going to happen in March. It's going to happen actually April 16th. And that's going to be on 3 more activities to bring into your own virtual programming for 2018. That too will happen at 11 a.m. Eastern. Got a number of other programs, including the Virtual Facilitation Essentials. That's going to run 4 times this year. The program is currently being reviewed with the ICF for continuing coach education, so we may have some hours available for that. And that program is also starting this Friday, but is an afternoon program. Whether you were here with me live or you were here on the phone today, I want to thank you. I hope that it's been useful and that you'll be able to start putting some attention around your skills. I know we've got a couple of you on the line, so if you'd like to just feed forward, is there anything you'd like to share in terms of your learning or next steps? Now is the invitation to do so. One thing I heard last week as we kicked off, and this was actually group coaching essentials, was the focus on presence. I think presence for many coaches, helping groups become more present, is going to be one area. I know for myself this year, it really is about returning back to the basics and keeping things simple as we go, whether it's slide design, program design. I really heard at the end of last year the importance of having these micro pauses, and that will be something that we'll still continue to do here at the Monday morning calls. Give you just a few minutes to look at these topics as well as to take stock of where you're at. So last call, any final comments before we wrap up? All right, well, I hear some background. Someone is on the move. Thank you for joining me today, and these will be posted over at effectivevirtualconversations.com. Have a great week, everyone. Take care.